There's a whole lot of complaints in the state of Wisconsin that are not being taken care of.
We expect government to protect us.
Do not lead us to believe that there is this department that is for a consumer, and it's not there.
To fight for us.
And everybody filled out a form, and there was, answered all their questions.
To deliver what it promises.
It sends a message that we're on our own.
But sometimes government overpromises and underdelivers.
They don't answer letters. They don't answer emails. They don't do much of anything.
This is the story of Wisconsin consumers who are not protected. Have you gotten anything from Consumer Protection?
No.
The story of the bureaucrats who get annoyed.
I think that's the 5th time you've asked the same question. And I think I've responded to it.
They were trying to figure out how they could sweep them under the rug, hoping that maybe you'd go away.
Tonight, we report from the state capitol to ask, who's protecting you? Good evening from the state capitol here in Madison. I'm Dan Cassuto. Some experts think the number of scams doubled during the recession. We need the government and the lawmakers in this building to protect us from wrongdoing more than ever. We pay taxes so the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection can protect us. We expect they're reviewing our complaints, investigating those con artists, and tracking them down, even locking them up. But after 8 months of investigating, we found the reality is quite different. Inside this building on the east side of Madison, the legislature gives the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection the power to enforce hundreds of consumer fraud and business laws. But victims from across the state say nobody is protecting them.
Well, we're old. She's got Alzheimer's.
If anyone needs consumer protection, it's George and Alita Gerber. She's 87, he's 89.
Do you want creamy cucumbers or cucumbers with vinegar?
Creamy.
They recently moved into an expensive assisted living facility in Belleville.
Sure, we got some savings, but that's going to be ate up in a hurry. And we figured this house would be a little, kind of a supplement.
They plan to sell their house in New Glarus.
They had a buyer there. Of course, you got to have an inspector. And of course, they seen these shingles.
But their deformed roof, only 9 years old, stood in the way. The buyer backed down, and the roofing company would only pay less than 10% of the $6,000 replacement cost, even with the warranty. So the Gerbers filed a consumer complaint with the state. This isn't the first time the staff over at Consumer Protection have heard about this problem. In fact, over the past 5 years, 121 other families have filed complaints about this same roofing company. The department didn't respond for 2 months until the couple's daughter started emailing state lawmakers. Then a letter arrives with the wrong person's name and an email. The state will not be able to help because of the huge expense to investigate and lack of staff.
Oh, it's a dirty shame. That's what it is. A fellow feels let down.
Raise your hand if you are no longer getting this paper. These 40 consumers from Columbus also feel let down. They filed complaints last year about a newspaper owner who sold subscriptions and never delivered. A year later, have you gotten anything from Consumer Protection?
No.
The department never responded. We found out they handed the complaints off to a local district attorney. The DA filed a civil complaint, but admits there will be no criminal charges or trial or jail time. Meanwhile, nobody's gotten any money back.
I would like to say that I think they could really do a better job, have better communication.
Makes me feel like they're probably a useless organization.
Evelyn Dorn and 25 others are also waiting. 2 years ago, they filed complaints about a driving school owner in Oshkosh who owes them more than $300 each. A phone call?
Nothing.
A letter?
Nothing.
An email?
Nothing.
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 We found out the department handed this case off to the transportation department. They revoked the school's license, and years later, the owner filed for bankruptcy. But the department says the owner never said anything about owing money to consumers, so they closed the case. Nobody bothered to tell Evelyn.
We're paying taxes for these officials and nothing's being done.
They think government is watching out for them, and the fact is there aren't the resources in place.
Tom Stobig would know about problems at the department.
My title in the Consumer Protection Bureau was Regulatory Specialist.
He worked there for 16 years. He's coming forward to tell you the truth about what happens after you file a complaint.
That one complaint would probably get through the, through the hotline, get referred to a consumer specialist. The standardized letters would go out, and if the business had an answer to the complaint, it's very possible a specialist would say, obviously there's a difference of opinion here, and we're closing out the case. Some of the managers over in DATCAP would not give permission to a consumer investigator to go outside of the city of Madison.
The department doesn't want you to know that. When we come back, the numbers. How often the department actually does something after you file a complaint, and what the secretary has to say about all those victims.
But all this paint is coming off the surface.
Joyce Clay of West Bend asked the consumer protection staff to mediate a dispute about her kitchen stove.
If you touch it, it comes off.
Instead, the department closed her case because the business simply denied responsibility.
Do not let us believe that you might help us out. I mean, if we're going to have to fight by ourselves, just tell us straightforward.
The state says it focuses on other problems: the do not call list, landlord-tenant disputes, and cable, telephone, and internet issues. But out of 15,000 consumer complaints in 2009, the state closed 8,400 after sending what amounts to a simple form letter to the business or suspect. In all, the department took civil action just 17 times, formal administrative action once, and worked to make one arrest. Rod Nielsenstuen is the department's secretary.
We aren't able, as much as we'd like to go from the beginning to the end of every single item.
But do you think your promotional materials tell consumers that you are going to do that?
No, I don't. I don't think that's a fair conclusion.
This is the promotional material the department sends consumers like you. It's a brochure that says the average savings is $968 after filing a complaint, and 90% of consumers would call again. In fact, the secretary likes that number.
90% satisfaction rate, over 90% of the people who use this agency say that they do it again.
2 minutes into our interview, Secretary Nielsenstuen had already touted that number twice. For months, his staff used that one number to say our reporting is wrong. Do you, sir, know how that survey is done?
Well, I don't know all the details of that or a lot of the other things in a big organization like this, of course, but I know that they go through a pretty thorough process.
I can't take full responsibility for the results as they are.
Bob Battaglia doesn't like the way the secretary promotes that survey, and you should listen to him. He happens to be the statistician who helped design it. If your job depended on the results of this survey and how it was presented, would you stand by it?
Yes. How it was presented, I would stand by the results of the survey. I may not stand by how it was presented.
There's a pretty big difference there.
You could say that, yes.
The reality is the survey is at best suspect and at worst totally wrong. Out of 40,000 calls to the hotline and 15,000 written complaints, only 3,000 consumers actually got surveys. The vast majority ignored it, but a quarter of those people took the time to respond, 750 people.
With the way they did this survey, they should be very uncertain about whether these results are really right or not.
Charles Franklin is a UW expert on accurate surveys. He told me the department needs to find out why so many people never responded and what they really think.
The issue is, are we seeing unrealistically inflated positive results? And again, there's simply no way to know given the way they've done the survey.
When you send a brochure to people that say 90% of everyone is satisfied, people expect that their complaints are going to get a lot of attention and that they're probably going to be satisfied.
And I think as we've just said repeatedly here, to answer again, if you're counting, perhaps I should. I think that's the 5th time you've asked the same question. And I think I've responded to it.
That survey also asked if consumers were satisfied with the results. Only 68% said yes. Everyone else is dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. That number did not make it into the brochure. And what about $968 average savings after filing a complaint? At first, the department refused to tell us how many consumers it even surveyed. The public information officer hung up the phone. Then we filed a formal open records request. And this is the document they sent us, a statistical report called the univariate procedure. Buried on the bottom is the truth. N equals 66. That means the average savings from the brochure is based on 66 people. So we dug even deeper. We reviewed every single one of those surveys. This is the single highest survey. Someone wrote they got $19,000. But check this out. They also wrote potentially. These surveys are anonymous, so nobody knows if this person ever ended up with any money in their pocket. So if you throw out that one survey, the new average drops down to $639. And there's more. Here's another stack of surveys. We counted 67 consumers who wrote 0. They got no money back. But the department disregarded all of those. They're not in the average. When you include all these zeros in the average, it falls again. This time down to $308. None of this made it into the brochure. At the same time Secretary Nielsenstein was sending them out, he was writing internal documents that seemed to tell the real story.
And then in this letter you wrote, you say, well, you're actually going to be helping fewer people from now on.
We obtained this letter the Secretary wrote to the State Budget Office in July 2009. He wrote, "We'll change the way we respond to consumer complaints, limiting investigation to the most significant complaints and reducing the number of investigators."
What that reflects is the fact that we had to make significant decisions and adjustments to a budget.
It seemed to me that the agency is committing consumer fraud in and of itself. And I think that's really ironic, because if you tell people that reporting to me means something is going to happen and you don't, how is that different from buying a product and never actually getting it?
Some people don't think they're honest. Republican Robin Voss is a state representative from Racine.
If we're going to tell people we have consumer protection, we should actually do it. Or we should say we can't afford to have consumer protection, you're on your own. But I don't think that trying to say we'll do everything when doing very little is a fair compromise.
It makes it the Wild West of consumer protection.
Brian Pagel is a Madison lawyer who's represented fraud victims for 10 years. He says the state is doing so little to enforce consumer laws, it will someday affect you if it hasn't already.
If Wisconsin gets known as a state that doesn't enforce consumer protection laws, then businesses will locate or do business here, and your con artists will start moving up here.
You would think a scenario like that would be terrifying to the lawmakers in this building. But instead of being concerned, some of them are just simply annoyed that we are asking questions. When we come back, the head of the Consumer Protection Committee walks out of our interview.